Melanoma is now the most common form of cancer in the 15 to 30 age group.
For men over 60, rates of melanoma are rising by a staggering 400%.
Two new drugs being used to treat advanced melanoma.
Attaching itself to the mutated BRAF gene, slowing the cancer growth and spread.
Some patients have had very substantial reductions in their tumours and achieved complete response. Many other patients have had very substantial reductions in the size of their tumours.
There is no safe use of Celerium.
Australia has the highest incidence of skin cancer in the world. We know that.
50% offering Celerium use to people with so-called type 1 skin. So this is people with very fair complexion that can never tan.
1 week and a bit, it's my 26th birthday, and I sit here and I don't even know whether I'm going to make that.
I'm Dr. Claire Fideli. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the Melanoma Research Laboratory at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre. Melanoma is a very complex disease. In order to develop new treatments, it's critical that we identify in the laboratory the biological mechanisms that drive the growth and progression of this disease. If we can develop a better way of testing new treatments, then we can fast track the movement of those drugs into preclinical trials. Working at Peter Mac is really inspiring for me personally. We have interaction with the patients, we share the lifts with them, we pass them in the corridors, and it really drives home the importance of what we're trying to achieve. I'm also inspired in my research by the story of Claire Oliver, and in fact I am personally funded by a fellowship from the Victoria Cancer Agency that was established in memory of Claire. Being around the same age as Claire, her story hits a personal note with me and really brings home the importance of what we're trying to achieve here. To be doing research in her name is a great honour and really inspiring for me.
Hello, I'm Professor Grant MacArthur, the Director of the Skin and Melanoma Service at the Peter Mac and also co-head of the Cancer Therapeutics Program. Along with New Zealand, we have the highest rates of melanoma in the world. Although we're winning the battle against cancer with a reduction in mortality in most cancers, melanoma has not benefited yet. Like most cancers, melanoma is a very complex disease. In fact, potentially more complex. The rate of mutations in melanoma is the highest of any type of cancer. To deal with that, we're taking a team approach. Our strategy at Peter Mac to make a difference to this disease is translational research. We have some of the world's leading scientists working at Peter Mac. We take their findings, apply that in new treatments, and assess them on clinical trials to build that bridge between basic discovery and better outcomes for our patients. We've been privileged at Peter Mac to be able to help lead the development of a wonderful new treatment for melanoma directed at the BRAF oncogene. The drug vemurafenib has now been approved worldwide as a new standard of care for melanoma. As a director of the melanoma service and a medical oncologist, as well as a laboratory researcher, I'm very privileged to be able to make observations in my patients, take it back to the lab, talk to my staff. They give me ideas. I take those ideas back to the patients, and we have this cycle going where we can take those findings from the lab, apply it to patients even quicker, and also learn from our patients and bring ideas back to the lab. This is a virtuous cycle to defeat melanoma.
My name is Michael Henderson. I'm a professor of surgery and I'm head of the Skin and Melanoma Service here at Peter Mac, along with my colleague Professor Grant MacArthur. Melanoma is Australia's cancer. Every year in Victoria there will be nearly 1,500 people diagnosed with melanoma. We see about 800 here at Peter Mac, but unfortunately we tend to see the patients who have more advanced disease. We're not certain exactly why people get melanoma, but we do know the sun has got something to do with it. It's not necessarily a direct relationship, but it may well be a combination of a genetic susceptibility, that is, fair-skinned, light-haired people living in an environment where there is high UVB exposure. For many years, those of us who looked after patients with melanoma and worked in melanoma research were regarded as the outcasts, but suddenly we're the tumour that everybody wants to know about because there's just been this fabulous explosion of knowledge. We've now started to get somewhere. Peter Mac's been a large part of my professional career now for many years, and it's a place that I enjoy working at. The vast majority of our patients are survivors, and those that unfortunately the disease has progressed, we have the honour and the great opportunity to try and help them as much as we can. The other reason that I really like working at Peter Mac is that this is probably the only place in the country where we have a concentration of highly skilled clinicians with the resources to look after patients better, I believe, than anywhere else. But sitting right beside us are some of the best and smartest scientific brains in the country. And a significant number of them have turned their attention to melanoma. We've got a long way to go, but I think this is a start of a really important phase for melanoma.
A mole on my left ankle that was there my whole life, but the last 6 months of 2007 it kept scabbing up and getting itchy, and it was only after much persistence from my wife that I finally went to the doctor and got it checked, and lucky I did because I came back as a melanoma. My surgeon is adamant that my solarium use contributed to my disease, so that's where I started the campaign to ban solariums around Australia, and New South Wales have done it, so hopefully after today national ban's not too far away.
A lot of people say, why am I doing that? But if I don't do anything about it, then it's just going to keep happening to other people.
Could you please welcome our panel? Professor Michael Henderson and Professor Grant McArthur. Okay, now I'm going to start this process, but remember that it is eventually all over to you because this is your opportunity to put your questions as well. But I'm going to start with you, Jay, because your fight against sunbeds has garnered national attention. How many states will allow them, and why the resistance to banning them?
So far, Victoria, Tasmania, Queensland and WA are still the ones behind that haven't banned. South Australia, as you might have heard in the news last week, announced they'll be banned in 2015 and New South Wales 2014. I think it's just persistence, and now that New South Wales has stepped up the ban, it's only a matter of time for the other states to follow the lead. All the hard work's been done in New South Wales, and of course, it goes back to Claire Oliver in the last weeks of her life that started and changed the mandatory around Australia, the age restrictions and stuff like that, and that's where it started. And little did I know that I'd be diagnosed with melanoma a few months later. But
she really touched the nation, didn't she?
She did, and I remember her story.
What was all that about, do you think? Was it because there's perhaps a degree of guilt that we all feel because we like to learn some of us do go in solariums? What was that all about?
I think people just aren't aware of the risks involved in doing something. They think, it's going to get tan, it can't be too much, it'll look good, but then little do they know that they could potentially end up with melanoma when they're in their 20s and 30s when they settle down, and that's what you don't want to be on. You don't want to be on the melanoma journey.
Grant, what do we know about the effect of sunbeds on skin?
Well, if you measure the intensity of the UV radiation that's produced, 5 times the rate of UV than the midday sun is. I showed that slide with the purple extreme, so up to 5 times that intensity you get from a solarium or sunbed. And we now know that around 87% increase in the risk of getting a melanoma if you've used a solarium before the age of 35. So there's really no doubt those data have been replicated now all around the world, and that's why the International Agency for Research in Cancer ranks UV radiation from solariums as a carcinogen in the same category as asbestos.
And what about in Europe, where sunbeds are the norm, particularly in the northern parts of Europe, the colder parts of Europe, where that is basically the only time that people can get any, UV rays at all. Are we seeing statistics much worse there?
Certainly, if the epidemiologists have done studies to try to work out what proportion of melanomas and due to Celerium mucin is certainly higher in Europe and Northern Europe than it is in Australia. In Australia, although we believe sunbed should be banned, Celerium should be banned, the proportion of melanomas due probably isn't as high as it is in those countries where, you know, Jay and I actually were just talking at lunch today, and I remember being in Switzerland where you can take the coins out of your pocket, walk in at the railway station and do it yourself Celerium, do it yourself radiation of your skin with no checks or regulations on that. It's just astonishing that the Europeans are allowed.
Professor Henderson, when you're dealing with patients, what percentage do you think of the melanomas that you're seeing would be the result of sunbeds?
It's a difficult question for all sorts of reasons. We know that sun obviously has a lot to do with the development of melanoma, but as I've mentioned in the video, there are other factors that modify the response. So people in the community who get very high levels of UVB exposure who don't get melanoma, it's just the same as people who smoke. It's a much higher risk of developing lung cancer, but not everybody who smokes gets lung cancer. So I suppose the more important question is what proportion of predominantly young people are going to Celeria and perhaps, apart from Celeria, indulging in behaviours that we would regard as not particularly smart as far as UVB exposure is concerned. And the proportion is, it's a guess, but it's probably in the order of 30 to 50% of people get more UVB exposure than they should, i.e. go out unprotected in the sun, 100 and get a tan, or use a Celerium.
So one would assume then that if sunbeds, if the Celeriums were outlawed the country over, we would see a statistical decrease, a significant statistical decrease?
Well, the lag time between UVB exposure and development of melanoma is probably going to be quite prolonged. So you remember that the SunSmart campaign, which Victoria has been the national leader in, I might add, from the Cancer Council of Victoria, we've started to see the reduction in the incidence of melanoma in just the recent years. It's probably going to take a decade or so till we see an absolute reduction. It's not to say that there won't be some people who have a genetic makeup or other factors who have been prevented from having a melanoma very quickly. But to see it statistically, the epidemiologist's work is probably going to take us quite a few years. But that's not a good reason why we should wait.